We're all suffering from too much stress and it's slowly killing our health, yet most of us are not aware of it. And most of us, even more of us, are not aware that there is actually a component in that stress reaction that our body has that nobody's talking about, and that's actually the key for you to remove that stress from your body. I'm going to tell you all about it. You probably heard this analogy, and I don't know if it's fact or just a fable, but it's this saying where they say, well, if you put a frog in cold water and you slowly heat it, it will just die because it doesn't notice that the water is getting too warm. And it's kind of like that with our stress levels. And we're all trying to be more healthy. We're trying to eat better. We're taking supplements. But that will never do as much for your health as having less stress in your body. And the fact that we don't even know how much stress is in there is getting really problematic. And it's not your fault because we actually have a protective mechanism in our body that makes it so that if we have something happening in our body for longer than 3 days' time and the body cannot change it, then the brain will start to adapt and it will go into our programming, into our blueprint that we have. And it will take the original program where it says, well, this is actually the original setting, this is the original normal. And it will take it and it will replace it with this new situation that it has been in for the last 3 days because it cannot change it. So it starts to adapt and take that faulty situation as our new normal. And when something becomes our new normal, we no longer notice that it is not what it is supposed to be. Now, our body is a marvelous machine. It is genius and it is made to handle stress. But then if we look into like what is the stress response in our body, we will very quickly get a result that says, well, we have a short-term response and we have a long-term response. And when we hear that terminology, there is already kind of a problem with that because at least when I hear long term, I think in terms of weeks, months, maybe even years. And that is very misleading when it comes to our stress response, because remember, there is an adaptation that happens after 3 days. So for our body, short-term stress response really talks about an hour, and a long-term stress response talks about a day, give or take. Okay, we're just going to explain everything in broad terms just to give you a good sense of it, not to get like every single minute detail in there because that's not important. It's important that we start to understand these things in their right proportions and in their right connections. And so when you further go into then what is a stress response, you can look in a physiology book or these days very easily ask an AI to tell you, explain to me the entire stress response. And I tested this before I made this video, and it will give you a very nice summation of what is everywhere, what you will find everywhere. And of course, that's correct, but there is this one component that is not present in any of these explanations. But to explain to you how that mystery component taps into our stress response, I'm really quickly going to go over it with you so that those of you who are not familiar with how the stress response works, that you get it and that you can also see the patterns and the connections, how it all ties into each other. So when we have a stressor, it can be something that our senses pick up, so something you see, something you hear, something you feel, but it can also be something you think. It can be an old memory that gets reactivated. All of those things can cause a stress reaction because they activate certain areas in our brain, and then those areas in our brain, they connect to the amygdala. And the amygdala is kind of like the alarm central. It's like kind of like 911. So it's a call that comes into the 911 central, and then it basically determines whether or not this call is valid or not, whether or not there is first responders that need to be sent out, or it's just kind of a prank call or somebody's completely overreacting. But in case it is decided that some first responders need to be sent out, that's when the amygdala sends their signal to the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is like the fire central, and then they kind of go like, oh, we need to send the paramedics, or we need to send the fire truck, or they then decide what kind of response it's going to do. And in the case of the hypothalamus, we basically have two responses, two phases of response, which correspond to what I was explaining earlier, short-term and long-term, or you could say acute and a little bit more long-term, slower response. So first, we'll cover the acute. In the acute circuit, the hypothalamus sends an electrical signal via the spine down the sympathetic nervous system to the adrenal glands so that they start producing adrenaline. And that adrenaline gets your heart pumping. It starts to redirect the blood flow from the organs into the muscles. It even starts to make your blood thicker so that in case you get injured, you don't bleed out as easy. So this is really, really close to like everything in function of that fight, flight, first response, going into battle or having to run away from something really, really fast, right? So that's that initial reaction. And then there is the second path, the more long-term path. That more long-term path is an hormonal chain reaction that goes from the hypothalamus to the hypophysis and then to, again, the adrenal glands. But this time, it's telling the adrenal glands to produce cortisol. And what cortisol does, it restructures the energy distribution in the body to keep that reaction going, because that is a massive reaction that like asks a lot of energy to have like all that stuff pumping and all that energy ready to fight or to flee or to make that really big physical insertion, basically. So then it starts to spike your blood glucose levels because it starts taking all the reserves, because the first ready to go stashes, they have already been used in the acute reaction. So it starts to mobilize the glycogen from everywhere else and starts to turn it into glucose. But it also starts preserving energy everywhere else. So all those systems that are constantly maintaining your body and making sure everything's functioning properly, they are going to the lowest level possible. And that's things like the rebuilding of your bones, the producing of your digestive enzymes, your sex hormones, your immune system becomes repressed. So all of those things, the energy is taken away from that. So you can imagine in a long-term state that can become very harmful if there's no renewal, if there's no rebuilding, if those things just get the bare minimum of what they need to stay somewhat functioning. But of course, as smart, as sophisticated as our body is, it also has a failsafe for that, of course. And that means if those cortisol levels get too high, there is something in our brain as well called the hippocampus that is supposed to get a signal that says, well, there's too much cortisol in here. We need to shut this thing down. And it does that, but because the stress system is such a loop and it gets like so feedback in from so many things, as we'll see, as we've already seen and see more in this video, that it's quite possible that despite the fact that there is a signal coming from we should stop the production, that other systems or other parts of the systems keep telling it like, well, no, we need more. And it still keeps coming, and it's kind of like if you have a gate to keep invaders out, but it just keeps pounding on that gate, eventually that gate is going to break. And so basically that continued impact of cortisol will eventually kind of break the hippocampus and break the failsafe that we have to stop our body from continuing this stress reaction. And I don't have to explain to you how many stressors we get in a day, even if it's just being on our phones and our computers all day. That's just so much input that we never had before in our evolution as human beings. And then there is all like the fast pace, the stress of work, the stress of life piling on top of that. So it's just putting so much pressure on us. So it's really hard to keep it low enough to not have that system triggered. But even when sometimes the external stresses stop, our body does not automatically stop the stress loop. especially if you had a very intense stress or a very long period of stress. And that brings us to our hidden component, because that is actually the guilty party in why that stress response then doesn't stop, even though the external stress stops. And that component, that thing, is what we call the fascia, also known as the connective tissue in our body. So the fascia, some people know it, if you've ever looked at an anatomy book, as those white parts that connect the muscles to the bone, also known as the tendons, and that it makes like some kind of plates and some structures around the muscles. And yes, that's absolutely connective tissue, that's absolutely fascia, but it is one aspect of it. And you can see fascia kind of as an array, where this thing that I just explained for the tendons, they are 99% fibers and 1% liquid. But then we have variations all across the scale where we go to 99% liquid and 1% fibers. And that liquid side of the spectrum, that kind of weaves a web through your entire body, connecting everything with everything, informing everything. It's completely infiltrated also with nerve endings. And it's making sure that everything is always connected in your body, always informed, and it shapes your body. So it has a very, very important function. And one other thing that it is highly sensitive to and that it responds to is stress. And there's a few ways that it can respond to stress. So the first one, what it does immediately when it perceives it, is it contracts, just like a muscle would do. It contracts kind of to create an armor, but it does it independently from the muscles. So because fascia, that network, it is very elastic, it is very flexible, it's very adaptable, and it has this capacity for the absorption of shock, which you could probably best compare to like a trampoline, or like a big pile of gelatin or something, that then when there is a shock coming off of it, it kind of will bounce off of it. So that's why it does that. But then when it's too much or too long, it also gets into trouble, because when it's too much, kind of like you have a very high-packed accident, you basically just like run through the trampoline, or if you have like a bunch of gelatin, you would like punch and your fist would get stuck. So then the actual trauma gets actually absorbed into the fascia instead of just having this bouncing off effect that protects you. And if it's too long, in the fascia, in the liquid, and in the structure, in the fibers, there's also cells in between there. They're called fibroblasts. And those fibroblasts, they will turn themselves into myofibroblasts, which myo comes from muscle. So it's they start mimicking themselves kind of after muscle cells, where they create these contraction elements inside of them, so that if they have to hold that tension for a long period of time, these muscle cells start to help them with that, that they start to be able to make like the net of the trampoline stronger and thicker and harder, and like it can get more impact without breaking, basically. But in the fascia, like I said, there is like a million nerve endings. It has like the most nerve endings of our entire body. And when those nerve endings become under pressure and under all that contraction, they start sending signals to our brain, and to two centers in particular. One is called the insula, which is an emotional center. So basically, it's telling the body is telling the brain, you should be afraid, there's a threat, because you have all this tension in your body. So it starts to create feelings of like angst and worry and unease and unsafety. And those then signal to our second center, the amygdala, which is also getting it in the first place, that there is more stress, that there is more danger. So the amygdala we've already covered, it's our 911 central that starts the whole reaction in the first place. And so now not only are we perceiving things that are stressful, our whole internal system starts to say, that is stressful. And even then, when those external things might go away, we still have this feedback loop in our system, because that fascia does not automatically release after a long time even if that external stressor stops. And then the second way is, well, remember the first acute phase where we have this fight flight reaction and our muscles get activated and everything. So we really go into this position where our spine kind of stretches, kind of hollows our lower back out, our chest kind of pumps up, the typical fight, like pounding your chest kind of posture. And because that happens so intensely, and even though the fascia contracts independently from the muscle, you also cannot separate that because fascia is interwoven with everything. And so the reaction in the fascia will also be the strongest in those muscles that create that position. And if that then position gets reinforced over a longer period of time, that means that our spine gets locked in that position. And that's the position that activates the sympathetic nervous system and blocks the parasympathetic nervous system, and especially the vagus nerve. So everything that calms us down, all those circuits basically become more or less, if we take it black or white, unusable because our body is now in this fixed position. Our spine is in this fixed position, and we no longer have the capacity to come out of it so that the other parts can be activated. And this is not just about, feeling stressed. This will actually start dysregulating everything. It dysregulates your nervous system, it dysregulates your hormone system, your digestive system, the whole lot of it. So it's quite a thing. And then the last aspect of the fascia is when it's in this constant tension, it starts to dry out. It becomes hard and static, and it starts to create this more toxic environment. Because remember, we're already dealing with this energy distribution, and the renewal of everything becomes super low, and our immune system gets like repressed, and now there is like this lack of nutrients coming in because there's not enough fluid and everything just gets tense. Blood vessels get tied off, and it's just like everything starts to kind of get backed up, and there's not enough removal from the waste products, and it just starts to create this whole vicious cycle of inflammation and aging and low energy, and everything just becoming off and kind of creating this kind of toxic swamp like environment in these places in our body or even everywhere where we are dealing with these blockages and these hardenings and so on. And so they all tie into each other. You cannot separate one from each other. All systems in the body, they're just always looping onto each other. And that's why for every person that comes to me, I start the sessions of reconnective body and energy work always with pulling out as much stress and tension as possible, because it breaks that feedback loop. It's working on the alignment of the spine so that our central axis, where that nervous system is, it becomes flexible again, it regains its movement again, and we have access to all aspects of our nervous system again, and so that they can calm down, and like all of that hyperactivation can be taken off. And that's just like no matter what the complaint is, basically, because without it we cannot regulate, and without that we're like stuck in an immune compromised position. So there is no point in trying to heal when everything else is compromised. And that's also why I recorded some of my sessions, and I've made them available for free for everyone to be able to have that support. And you don't need to do anything, you just have to receive them, turn them on and receive them. And it might sound a bit strange to some, like, how can a recorded session then help me? What can I receive? But I promise in future videos, I will explain all about fascia and its internal movement, and how it's both physical and energetical at the same time, how it's that crossroads, and how it works, how you can tap into it yourself, how those regulating properties that it has can start to activate and balance the whole system and start to reduce those stress levels. But in the meantime, before we get to that, I still wanted to make them available to you so you can already start enjoying these sessions of reconnective body and energy work, and your fascia can start to release, and those stress and tension that you're holding can start to be reduced. All you have to do is go to my website and sign up totally free. I'll make sure the link is in the description below. And I hope that you enjoy them. Let me know how you feel when you turn them on. I would love to hear from you. If you have more questions, please send them to me or write them in the comments. Then I know exactly what you need to hear more about, and I can make more videos to inform you, to help you, so that you can reconnect back with yourself.